Hello, nature lovers. Do you love to read books like I do? I've always enjoyed reading books ever since I was a kid, especially books about nature. Unfortunately, as I get older, I find myself with less and less time to sit down with a good book. I've solved that problem with Audible. Audible allows you to listen to your favorite titles while you are driving, at the gym, taking a walk, wherever you are. With all the latest titles, you'll have quite a selection to choose from. And they have podcasts too. Start listening today with a free 30-day trial. To get your free 30-day trial, go to the show notes and click on the link. Happy listening. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Nature Wanderer podcast. I'm Paul, your host, and I was just asked earlier today by my wife, as we're sitting there relaxing, watching the grass grow, watching the world go by, watching the birds at our bird feeders, and she turned to me after looking at our lawn, and she's like, you just mowed it yesterday, and how come all the dandelions are up? And it's not just the beautiful yellow ones, it's all the white ones. It's almost like you cut down the yellow ones and they decided to come back in the white. And I told her, I says, well, that's just nature. It is low mow May, and so I've been keeping my grass a little bit taller. I've been mowing it less, but that doesn't really matter because dandelions are very adaptive. Dandelions, those beautiful yellow flowers that a lot of people consider weeds and they're trying forever to eradicate them. I can always tell when someone's spraying their lawns, no dandelions. But the dandelion has learned that, hey, if I stay nice and tall and grow real tall, I'm going to get my head cut off. Yep, I'm going to get my head cut off once a week when that darn lawnmower comes flying through. So they have learned, hey, if I stay low to the ground, I don't get my head cut off, and I'll be able to still grab the sunlight and survive. So that's why dandelions usually grow really short in people's lawns, and yet just to the edge of the lawn, they're growing taller because they have to get up above the grasses and the other plants so that they can get to the sunlight. But this time of year, or towards the end of spring, the dandelions are starting to die off. They gathered all that energy already, and now they need to disperse. They need to spread. And that's what plants do. Can you imagine if all plants just stayed in one place and they just grew in one place? That would be boring. And you wouldn't have any diversity. There's a word that I always love to talk about, diversity. Diversity is essentially where you have a lot of different species, whether it's plants, animals, whatever, all in one area. And that's what you're looking for, is diversity in a habitat. If you have only one species of tree, you're going to have the animals that depend on that one species of tree, which means you're going to have very few animals there. You're going to have very little diversity there, and eventually the ecosystem there will collapse. You need diversity to hold the ecosystem strong and hold it together. So you want lots of different types of plants, you want lots of different types of animals, you want lots of different types of birds, and you want diversity, wide diversity, a lot of diversity. I've got an episode coming up on rainforests, which you want to talk diversity. Wow, rainforests are loaded with diversity. But you want a lot of diversity, and the way you get diversity with plants is seeds. They need to spread the seeds. They need to expand. Otherwise, they're just going to stay in one place. So there's different ways for seed dispersal to get those seeds out into new locations, into new areas. That's what I want to talk about today, is how these seeds do it. How these plants do it, I should say. How the plants get these seeds out there. How they transport them. So seed dispersal is pretty interesting. And the seed dispersal happens pretty much any time of the year. Mostly in the spring and in the fall is when you get most of your seed dispersal, depending on the plant. Very little of it happens in the winter, of course, but there are some areas and some plants that will disperse their seeds in the winter, and some need special conditions. Some types of pines will only disperse their seeds after a forest fire, after extreme heat. It opens it up so that the seeds can be planted. This is all how plants will survive out there and how they spread to new territories. Now you have to remember the habitat has to be right as well. I mean, you aren't going to get palm trees up in the northeast here because they're used to a more tropical, warm climate. So they're only going to disperse so far. If they disperse further, if they're transported further, they're just not going to survive there, usually. I always like to say, there's no definites in nature. So to start with, what is a seed? A seed is an undeveloped plant embryo. And with it, not just the embryo of that plant, it's also food reserve. The food reserve is actually enclosed right in the seed there with the embryo so that it allows it some instant nutrients that it will grow as soon as it gets into the proper conditions. Now, this whole embryo and food storage has a protective outer coating to it, which is called the testa, T-E-S-T-A, the testa, which is the seed coat. And all of this is packed into a little or a big package, depending on what plant we're talking about, but it's packed into this package waiting for the right conditions to be planted and then start growing. So that's what a seed is. Now these seeds or embryos are usually fertilized by pollen. So the pollinators, if you remember the bee episode, I talked a little bit about pollinators, and they will spread the pollen from one plant to another to create these embryos. Now this seed then needs a way to get planted, and there's several ways that this happens. Now seed dispersal, happening anytime from spring to fall, rarely in the winter, but it could. Rarely in the winter. Usually spring to fall is when they're being dispersed. How are they being dispersed? And there are several ways, and they're pretty interesting. The plant has chosen the way that suits them best depending on their habitat, where they are located, the temperatures, the climate. A lot of things will tell the plant, hey, this is the best way to disperse your seeds. Now, the first one is gravity. That's probably the one that most people think of, gravity. So you have this seed pod growing up on a tree or some other plant, and all of a sudden the stem or whatever part is holding that seed to the tree suddenly gets weak enough where it just drops it to the ground. It breaks. And gravity, that thing that Isaac Newton discovered, that gravity that keeps us down on the ground and makes us fall when we trip over a tree root to the ground, not float up in the air. That's gravity, and it pulls that seed right down to the ground. Hopefully it will, through rain and more gravity, it'll be pulled down into the ground, or sometimes they actually just start growing from the moisture of the rain. The seed casing will break open and the roots will come out and they'll go right into the ground and they'll start growing right there. That is the first way that seeds can be dispersed, just by falling off of the plant. But unfortunately, that's not that great for diversity, because that plant is growing where? Down below the original plant. Great if that mother plant dies, but not so great if it's trying to get its seeds somewhere else, farther away. If it's a tree we're talking about, once those leaves come out on the tree, not much light gets down on the ground. It's hard for those plants, those seeds on the ground, to start growing up. So they really should, to build better diversity, get those seeds further away. And one of the ways that it gets things further away is through the wind. Yeah, winds will carry the seeds much further. I was talking about the dandelions earlier. Those little white balls of fluff, after the dandelion changes from the yellow flower, those little white balls of fluff are basically a ball of seeds. So those seeds come with their own little umbrella or parachute or whatever you want to call it. It has its own transport. You get a good wind, it's grabbing that fluff and it carries it through the wind much further away. Depending on how windy it is, depends on how far it'll go. So if you ever take one of these dandelion fluffs and you pull off one single fluff, you're going to notice there is a tiny seed at the end of that. So there's dozens of seeds in each one of these dandelion heads. The wind will just carry them away. So that's one of the best examples of it. Now, I was talking about trees earlier and how the seed will just drop, but that's not true with all trees. Do you have a maple tree in your yard? I remember being a kid and the helicopters. Do you still do that? I still do it because I got a kid inside of me, waiting to come out again. But I'm a kid at heart. When I have one of those maple seeds, I love just tossing them in the air and they come flittering down. Well, if it's a windy day, it's not coming straight down, even though it's in a helicopter spiral headed for the ground. That wind is going to carry it. It's going to carry it away to a further location. So it will carry it a little bit of a distance. So that's another way of seed dispersal, is the wind. So the maple helicopters are a great example. I've got a lot of white pine on my property. In the springtime, you get all of the pollen from my white pines getting blown out of the trees, and it's almost like a cloud of pollen. And it helps to fertilize some of the other trees, creating the pine cones. So the pine cones, when they're growing, they have tiny little seeds down in towards the middle of the cone. And squirrels love those. They love eating them, which is another way of transport. Seed transport is through animals. The animal, like the squirrel, will eat the seed because they love pine seeds. They'll go up there, they'll rip that seed apart, and when you see that big pile of ripped apart pine cones underneath the pine tree, we call that big pile, we call it midden. So if you ever hear that term midden, that's what they're talking about. Big pile of pine cone scales on the ground, because the squirrel, he doesn't want to eat those. They don't have much flavor. No, he's after that seed. So other animals too, they eat seeds. Seeds are often inside of fruits. You ever have an apple and you don't eat the core? Because the seeds are there. But seeds are inside of a lot of different fruits. And the fruits are nice and sweet, so the animals eat the fruits, but the seed casing is strong enough to get through all of the acids in the stomach of that animal. So when the animal travels, then has to do its business, poops in the woods, the animal will actually go to the bathroom, and out in that scat, if you've never heard that term, that's the proper way to say wildlife poop. Okay, we call it scat. So when the animal, it does its thing in the woods, out comes that seed in the scat, and it's pre-fertilized. Yeah, it's already fertilized. So it's a win-win situation for that seed. That seed gets eaten, but it's strong enough casing, it doesn't get digested. And it gets pooped out somewhere a distance from wherever it originally came from, and it's also been fertilized. So animals are another great way of transport. And speaking of transport with animals, it's not just eating the seeds. Sometimes animals will transport them just by walking next to it. I remember as a kid on the playground, I got in trouble every once in a while from the teachers when I would do this, but me and my friends, we would go up to the burdock plants. You ever have burdock and the little burrs on there with the little hooks on the end? I was told that that's where the idea of Velcro came from some guy who decided, hey, this is a neat way to stick things together. Yeah, probably came home with a bunch of burrs on his shirt. He took that little hook idea and made Velcro. So the burrs, I used to take them in school, and my friends would too. It wasn't just me. We were all causing trouble, but on the playground we would pick the burrs and throw them at each other and see how many we could get to stick to another person. We'd have like a burr competition. But when like a deer or a fox or a coyote, they're walking through the woods and they get these little burrs stuck to their fur. Then when they bed down for the night and they start cleaning themselves and getting all the dirt off of them from the day, and they pick the burrs off, and the burrs fall to the ground, far away from where they came from. So another way for an animal to disperse seeds. That's what the burr is. It's a seed inside of there. And there's lots of different, I did mention burdock, but there's a lot of plants that have this mechanism of little sticky burrs. I get every once in a while I'll be walking down a trail and I'll have all these tiny little burrs stuck to my pants, and they're tough to get off. I prefer the bigger ones. They come off much easier. But those are the same concept. It's a little seed inside of there. And that little seed is being carried a distance by the animal until the animal cleans itself off and down on the ground they fall. Another way of transport is through water, and this is mostly with aquatic plants. Aquatic plants will make their seeds, the seed will drop off of the plant and it floats away in the water to another area, the pond or downstream or the other side of the lake, wherever they are in the ocean. And that's how aquatic plants spread or transport their seeds, is with the water current. The seeds are designed to float, or at least not to sink immediately down to the bottom. They'll float enough where they can be carried away until they get to either so waterlogged, they get to where, they can't float anymore, or they get to shore if they are the type that is more, growing on the shoreline. They will then sink down to the bottom, and that's where they are planted. So water is another way of transport. And it's not just with aquatic species. Some plants grow close to the water. I know silver maple is, I love the silver maple. It's a beautiful tree. Usually likes wet habitats. And I often see when I'm kayaking down a river, I'll see a lot of silver maples along the edge. And that's a plant that the seed pods, sometimes they just float down to the ground. Other times they'll fall in the water and the water carries them further downstream where they'll be planted along the riverbank. And you get a new silver maple growing there so that the whole process can start over again. Now the final form of seed dispersal that I want to talk about is what we call ballistic, where it's kind of like a missile. It goes shooting out of the plant. And this does happen with certain plants. Matter of fact, I'm actually on the trail where I don't see any right now because it's a little bit too early in the year, but it should be coming up soon. I usually get in this moist area here, I get what we call touch-me-not, which is also known as jewelweed. Jewelweed gets its name because if you hold the plant under the water, the bottom of the leaves will actually glisten like a silvery color. Looks like jewels on it. So that's where it got the name jewelweed. It got the name touch-me-not because as you pass by it, you're going to see these little orange flowers on it, but it also has these really thin, like seed pods sticking out from it. And if you walk right through a batch, you're going to have all these little seeds bouncing all over your face. They have a special mechanism in those seed pods where as soon as you touch them, they have to be ready to do this. They have to be, at the right growth where they're just ready to pop and they're just waiting for something to touch them. And it can be the plant itself. If it's a windy day and that seed pod touches another part of the plant, it's going to explode. But if you go up to it and you just touch that little seed pod, all of a sudden it just comes unraveled. And as it comes unraveled, the seeds just go flying out of it. And they're propelled quite a distance. And by quite a distance, I'm not talking like 100 feet, no. But they'll jump at least 3 or 4 feet. So they're slowly dispersing their seeds further and further away. And that's the touch-me-not plant. Very interesting. I love those things. They're so neat. Jewelweed is also, just as a side note, jewelweed is a known remedy for poison ivy. So if you're the type who gets poison ivy, I don't. And I've touched poison ivy many times. I've gotten the oils on my skin and I'm just not sensitive to it, but I could eventually, get sensitive. If you're not sensitive now, doesn't mean you're not sensitive forever, unfortunately. But I've never had poison ivy, but if you're the type who does get poison ivy and you accidentally get some poison ivy on you and you start to get the rash, you can actually get some jewelweed, some touch-me-not, and you make it into a paste and you rub it on the spot and it will soothe it and it'll cure it much quicker. They grow in the same area usually as poison ivy as well. So there are some plants besides touch-me-not that also have the propulsion where all of a sudden the right conditions hit, they're going to just shoot the seed out. Now, as I'm headed up the trail here a little bit further, there's another interesting plant here. And I actually see two of them I want to talk about, but this one covers a small section of my field. And this is what we call dogbane. I love this plant because I make cordage out of it. There's a whole process for making cordage, which is like rope. So I can make some thin rope out of it. It's very tough, strong rope. It's a very interesting plant. Be careful with it. It has a milky substance in it, which can be toxic. If you get it on your fingers and you lick your fingers, it could make you sick. I was told that it takes quite a bit of it though to really make you sick, but smaller animals, dogs, if they eat it, it could kill them. So that's one of the reasons it got the name dogbane. As I'm walking by, some of the newer shoots, this year's growth is starting to come up, but last year's growth is still here. You can see all these thin seed pods that have already been opened. They usually open up in late summer. And when they open up, there's all this little fluff, like the dandelion fluff. Dandelions don't have the monopoly on air transport with fluff. Now, these are another one that has fluff inside with seeds attached to all those little fluffy, lightweight parachutes. So they open up, they dry, and they open up, letting the fluff out, and the wind, first windy day, it carries them away, and that's how it transports it. And while I've been walking here, I've come up to another one that does the exact same thing, milkweed. Yeah, milkweed's known for their fluffy seeds that with wind transport, and the wind will just carry that away as it opens up in the, once again, usually late summers when you get this one spreading its seeds. So as you wander around your yard or local park, look around for the different types of seeds and try to figure out, what's transporting these seeds. How are they getting from point A to point B? How are they getting from one place to another? Is it through animals getting stuck on their fur, being eaten? Is it a bird that ate that seed and then flew quite a distance and deposited it with fertilizer somewhere else? What is allowing this plant to transport its seeds to a much further location so that we can have more biodiversity, more diversity elsewhere. Try to figure that out as you're wandering around. And speaking of wandering, I'm gonna wander on back to my house now and relax on my patio watching the birds. It's such a gorgeous day. Maybe I'll see some more seed dispersion because there is a little bit of a wind today. So hopefully you'll enjoy the day and wander through nature looking for seed dispersal. If you enjoyed wandering through nature with me, don't forget to rate and review the podcast. Share it with your friends. The more the merrier, wandering through nature with us. If you'd like to support the podcast, go to my Ko-Fi page or my Patreon page. Become a patron, you get a lot of extras. And you can find the links in the show notes or go to my website at naturewanderer.org. My Instagram is thenaturewanderer, underscores in between each word. If you'd like to look awesome wandering through nature, don't forget to get a Nature Wanderer t-shirt or other merchandise from my store. Once again, that's in the show notes as well, or linked from my website. Until next time, have a great week and keep exploring the nature around you.